It was just a faded envelope, yellowed by time, edges frayed, the ink barely visible under the weight of decades. But inside was something no one was ever supposed to read. A confession sealed in fear, written with trembling hands somewhere on the cold soil of Europe during the darkest days of 1944. Now imagine this. You're sitting in your living room, maybe scrolling through your phone, maybe just passing time, and suddenly, someone hands you a letter. It's addressed to your great-grandfather, written by someone you've never met. Someone who by the very first line makes it clear he never survived to tell his story. If you're reading this, I'm already dead. That's how it begins. No greetings, no explanations, just that single sentence, punching you in the chest like a ghost reaching across generations. But why would someone write a letter like that? What could be so important, so urgent, that a dying soldier's final thoughts were scrawled onto a piece of paper that was never supposed to be found? Let me take you back. France, late November 1944. The forests of Hurtgen were nothing but mud, fog, and death. The Allied forces were pushing forward, but every step costs dozens of lives. Soldiers were cold, hungry, and scared, and among them was Private Thomas Keller, age 23, born in Illinois, farmer's son, not a hero, just a guy trying to survive. Thomas knew his chances were low. He'd seen too many friends disappear in the mist. He'd watched men freeze overnight. He'd heard the screams of the wounded, the ones left behind when retreat wasn't an option. So, one night, with shaking hands and numb fingers, he pulled out a scrap of paper. It wasn't even proper stationery, just a torn piece from a ration box. And with the stub of a pencil he began to write. He didn't start with his name. He didn't start with the date. No, his first words were pure, unfiltered fear. If you're reading this, I'm already dead. There's something almost unbearable about that line, isn't there? It's not poetic, it's not heroic. It's just real, raw, like the last breath of a man who knows time's up. But the next part, that's where the weight of it hits even harder. I don't know who will find this. Maybe nobody. Maybe some stranger years from now. Maybe someone who knew me, or thought they did. Think about that. Thomas was aware, even as he wrote, that this wasn't going to reach family. This wasn't going to be a goodbye letter sent home in a neat military envelope. This was a message to anyone, a random voice shouting into history, hoping someone someday might hear it. The letter continued. I don't want to die out here. God knows I don't, but the shelling's getting closer every day. Last night, Charlie didn't come back from patrol. This morning, Davis stepped on a mine. I'm writing this now because I'm afraid I won't get another chance. It's hard to read without feeling the cold creeping in, without hearing the distant echo of artillery, without imagining Thomas, hunched behind some half-buried log, pencil shaking as he fought against time. And then, the part that broke me when I first read it. I keep thinking about home, about how corn smells in July, about how Mom used to leave the porch light on, just in case I stayed out too late. Funny, isn't it, out here, with all this blood and mud? The thing I miss most is the sound of crickets on a summer night. Can you feel that aching simplicity, that need for something, anything, familiar, when everything around you is falling apart? But the letter didn't stop there. Thomas had more to say, more to confess. I'm scared people will remember me wrong, that they'll think I was brave, that I went down charging a hill with a rifle in my hand. But that's not me. Right now I'm terrified. I haven't slept in 2 days. My hands won't stop shaking. And when the shooting starts, I curl up and pray it's over fast. This is the side of war we don't see in movies. The unfiltered fear, the honesty, the vulnerability of a man too tired to pretend. Any more than it came something unexpected. There's something else I need to say. Something I've never told anyone. At this point in the letter, the handwriting changed. The lines grew more erratic. Some words were crossed out, others rewritten. You could almost feel Thomas debating with himself. Do I write this? Do I leave this truth here, for anyone to find? And then, he did. I'm in love with someone back home. Not a girl. Not who everyone expects. His name's Michael. He worked at the hardware store. We used to fish by the river. I never told him. I never told anyone. Guess it doesn't matter now. Silence. Imagine that 1944, a time when such feelings weren't just taboo, they were dangerous. For Thomas, this wasn't just a confession. It was a secret that could have ruined him, even in death. Yet here it was, scrawled in pencil, on a dirty piece of cardboard, left behind for the world or no one to discover. Then came the final lines, the ones that linger long after you finish reading. If this letter finds its way to someone, anyone, just remember me as I was, not as a soldier, not as a name on a wall, just as a boy who was scared, who loved someone, and who didn't want to die alone. He signed it with only his initials, TK. That's where the letter ended, and for decades, that's where the story paused, until one day, in the attic of an abandoned farmhouse near Hurtgen Forest, a historian found a metal box. Inside, rusted dog tags, a photograph of 2 young men fishing, and a torn letter, still smelling faintly of earth and gunpowder. That letter now sits in a museum in Illinois, and Michael, the boy from the hardware store. No one knows if he ever found out. But now, you know Thomas Keller's story. And maybe that's enough to keep his memory alive. Before we move on, I want you to stop for a second. Think about it. How many stories like this were lost? How many voices like Thomas's disappeared into the dirt without ever being heard? If you're still with me, if you felt even a fraction of what I felt reading that letter, do one thing for me. Hit that like button, subscribe, share this video, because these stories, these forgotten voices, deserve to be heard. Let's step back a few days before that letter was written. Before pencil met paper. Before fear turned into words. Before Private Thomas Keller became a voice reaching across time. November 18, 1944, Hurtgen Forest. Imagine waking up cold. Not just cold bone deep, soul-crushing cold. The kind that settles into your joints, your teeth, your lungs. The kind of cold that feels like it's reaching in to pull the life right out of you. That's how the men of Company C started their mornings, huddled in foxholes barely wide enough to turn around in blankets wet from the rain, boots stiff and frozen from the mud, and every breath a visible puff of steam in the air. Thomas was no different. Wrapped in a damp overcoat, hugging his rifle for warmth, counting minutes until the sun rose, except sometimes the sun didn't rise, not really. The fog was so thick it pressed against your skin like a second uniform. Visibility maybe 5 feet, 10 if you were lucky now. Imagine trying to fight in that. Every tree, every shadow, every gust of wind could hide an enemy sniper, could be the start of an ambush, could mean death, and yet they pushed forward. Orders were simple: advance, hold the line, wait for reinforcements. But reality was far more complicated. 2 days before Thomas wrote his letter, the platoon lost their radio man. Corporal Jensen shot clean through the chest while trying to string a communication line between 2 foxholes. 1 second he was crawling through the underbrush. The next he was face down, unmoving. No dramatic last words, just silence. Thomas saw it happen. He watched as 2 medics dragged Jensen's body back behind the lines. He watched as his friend Davis picked up the bloodied radio, hands shaking, voice cracking with static as he tried to call for help. No help came that night. They buried Jensen in a shallow grave near the tree. No ceremony, no time for goodbyes. Just a small wooden marker stuck into the earth, already tilting from the rain. Thomas didn't sleep that night. He sat with his back against a tree, staring into the dark, listening to distant artillery, and that's when he started thinking, what if I'm next? What if tomorrow someone else digs a hole for me? The following day, November 19th, Charlie went missing. Private Charles Harding, 22 years old, the joker of the group, always had a story, always had a smile, but that morning, during patrol, Charlie never came back. The squad waited for hours, hoping he'd appear from the mist, maybe with a twisted ankle, maybe with a good excuse, but as night fell, hope faded. Thomas overheard the lieutenant whispering to the sergeant, if he's still out there, he's already gone. That's how fast things changed out here. One day you're laughing at someone's bad joke, the next you're digging a hole with trembling hands. The mental toll was impossible to describe. Food rations were low. The little bread they had tasted like dirt. Canned meat was cold, slimy, barely edible, and the coffee mostly just muddy. Water heated over a tin burner. Sleep was fragmented. An hour here, 30 minutes there. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves jolted men awake, hearts racing. Fear wasn't something that came and went. It settled, became part of your skin, your breath, your bones. And through it all, Thomas watched, listened, felt his own sanity slipping. That night, November 19th, something inside him broke. Lying in the mud, staring at the canopy above, he pulled out the scrap of cardboard from his pack, fumbled for his pencil and began. With those words, if you're reading this, I'm already dead. But what's haunting is that Thomas didn't stop writing after that first paragraph. That as the cold worsened and the shelling intensified, he kept adding to the letter, folding it, refolding it, rereading it, tweaking words, scratching out sentences, as if somehow getting it right on paper would bring him peace. It was his way of reclaiming control over something he couldn't control at all. But let's pause for a moment, because here's a question you might be asking yourself. Why do we care so much about one soldier? Thousands, tens of thousands died during World War II. What makes Thomas Keller's story stand out? The answer is simple. Because we're not wired to mourn statistics. We mourn names, faces, stories. Thomas wasn't just a soldier. He was a son, a friend, a secret keeper, a boy in love with someone he never dared to tell. And by reading his letter, by piecing together his last days, we give him back something the war tried to erase, his humanity now, back to that freezing night. As Thomas wrote, he heard something in the distance, a low rumble, not quite thunder, but close. Artillery. Incoming. Within seconds, the ground around him exploded in dirt and shrapnel. Men scrambled for cover, yells mixed with gunfire. The fog lit up with flashes of orange and red. Thomas stuffed the letter into his breast pocket, close to his heart, and then he ran. Dodging between trees, sliding into another foxhole, praying the next shell wouldn't have his name on it for hours. The bombardment continued by morning. The forest was littered with broken trees and broken bodies. Thomas survived the night, but something had changed. The look in his eyes, darker now, the weight on his shoulders, heavier. Later that day, Davis's friend with the radio sat beside him and said, "Tommy, you okay?" Thomas didn't answer, just stared into the distance, thumb tracing the edge of the folded letter in his pocket. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind thick clouds, they got new orders: advance at dawn, another push through enemy lines, another chance or another grave. That night, as Ard, he sat alone. Thomas unfolded the letter one last time, added a few more words at the bottom. "If you're reading this, I hope it means someone found me. I hope it means I wasn't forgotten." And with that, he folded it tight, pressed it to his lips, and tucked it back inside his jacket. Tomorrow would be another fight or his last. Before I take you into that next day, into what really happened during the final moments of Thomas Keller's life, I want to ask you something. If you found a letter like this, tucked away, forgotten by history, would you read it? Would you share it? Would you tell his story? Because in a few minutes, that's exactly what we're going to do. If you're still here, if you're feeling this story as deeply as I am, hit that like button, subscribe, leave a comment below. Tell me, would you have been brave enough to write that letter? Stay with me, because next, we step into Thomas's final dawn. November 21st, 1944. Dawn broke, but the sun didn't rise. The sky remained a dull, colorless gray, thick with fog and smoke. The air tasted like metal, wet, cold, electric. Every breath filled Thomas Keller's lungs with the scent of burned wood, and gunpowder. Orders had been clear the night before. At first light, advance north, push past the ridge, secure the farmhouse at the edge of the forest. Simple on paper, deadly in reality. Thomas sat on the edge of his foxhole, helmet strapped tight, fingers numb as they loaded bullets into his rifle's magazine. Around him, other soldiers prepared in silence. No jokes, no casual banter, just the quiet shuffle of boots in the mud, the clink of metal against metal, the soft, trembling exhales of men pretending they weren't afraid. Davis knelt beside him, adjusting the strap on his radio pack. "Tommy," he whispered, "you ready?" Thomas glanced over, managed a small nod, but deep inside, he wasn't ready. None of them were. At 6:10 hours, a single whistle cut through the air. Go time. Men surged from their foxholes like shadows breaking free from the earth, boots slipping on wet leaves, rifles raised, eyes scanning every inch of the mist ahead. Thomas moved with them. Step by step. Heart pounding, every sense on fire. The forest, usually silent, erupted into chaos. Machine gun bursts cracked through the air. Mortar shells exploded nearby, sending dirt and shrapnel raining down. Screams mixed with the mechanical roar of war. Thomas dove behind a fallen log, catching his breath, blood rushing in his ears like a drumbeat somewhere to his left. Davis was yelling into the radio, trying to call for artillery support. Ahead, Private Miller fell face first into the mud, a dark red stain blooming across his chest. Thomas knew better than to stop. Stay low, keep moving. Eyes forward, he crawled through the underbrush, heart threatening to burst from his chest. Every second felt stolen from death. 100 yards ahead, the outline of the farmhouse emerged from the fog, broken windows, crumbling walls, but still standing. That was the objective. Thomas pushed forward, scrambling over exposed roots, ducking behind trees. Suddenly, flash, a deafening boom. The tree next to him exploded, splinters tearing through the air like daggers. Something hot and sharp ripped across Thomas's shoulder. He screamed, dropping his rifle, rolling onto his back in the mud. For a few moments, everything blurred. The sky spun above him, the world muffled like hearing through water. Then, a hand, Davis pulling him to his feet, shouting words Thomas couldn't fully understand. "Move, Tommy, move." With blood running down his arm, Thomas stumbled forward, clutching his jacket tight. The letter still there, pressed against his heart. Together, he and Davis made it behind a small stone wall near the farmhouse. Bullets slammed into the stones inches above their heads. Dirt kicked up around them. Somewhere nearby, someone was crying for a medic. Thomas grabbed Davis's sleeve. "Radio in, call for help," he yelled, voice hoarse. Davis nodded, fumbling with the radio, hands slick with sweat and mud. But before he could finish dialing in the frequency, another explosion. Thomas felt the impact before he heard it. The wall disintegrated, the force knocked backwards. His ears rang with high-pitched static, opening his eyes. All he saw was gray. Dust, smoke, fog, and silence. For a few endless seconds, he lay there staring at the sky, heart slowing, vision dimming. But something pulled him back, a sound faint but unmistakable, the crinkle of paper inside his jacket. The letter. Thomas forced himself up onto his elbows, gasping for air. Blood smeared across his cheek. His left arm hung uselessly at his side. With trembling fingers, he reached inside his coat, pulling out the folded letter. It was stained now, dirt and blood smudging the pencil lines, but still intact. Holding it in his hand, Thomas smiled, a tired, broken but real smile, because somehow, against every odd, it was still with him. That's still here, still his. That small square of paper. More important than the rifle he'd dropped. More important than the helmet, now cracked at his side. It was proof that he existed, that he mattered, that someone, somewhere, would know he tried. As the firefight raged around him, Thomas pulled himself to his knees, then to his feet. Every step forward, a battle. Every breath, a victory. He stumbled toward the farmhouse, toward his last objective. But fate had other plans. Halfway across the open field, another shot rang out. Sharp, sudden, precise. Thomas fell, the letter slipping from his hand, landing in the mud beside him. As he lay there, eyes wide, staring at the pale sky above, the cold began to creep in, fingers stiffening, vision narrowing. But before everything went dark, one final thought crossed his mind. Maybe someone will find it. Maybe someone will tell my story. Then, stillness. By midday, the shooting stopped. The farmhouse taken. Survivors few. And among the scattered bodies in that field, one young soldier lay still, mud covering his boots, blood staining his jacket, and near his chest, a folded piece of paper. 2 days later, during cleanup operations, a medic named Corporal Richard Hayes found the letter, pulling it carefully from Thomas's jacket, wiping the dirt away, reading the first trembling words. "If you're reading this, I'm already dead." Hayes didn't know Thomas personally, but standing there, in the cold, with artillery still echoing in the distance, he felt a weight settle in his chest, a need to protect that letter, to make sure it wasn't lost. So, he tucked it safely inside his pack, and when he returned to base, he handed it to the commanding officer. The letter, eventually, made its way across the ocean. To a small house in Ohio, where a woman with trembling hands unfolded it and began to read. But before we get to that moment, before we hear the reaction of the family who received the most heartbreaking words a mother could ever read, I want you to pause, breathe, and think. What would you write? If you knew it could be your last chance, what words would you choose? Who would you address? What regrets, what hopes, what memories would fill your final page if this story is touching you? If you want more people to hear Thomas's voice, do me a favor, click like, subscribe, and stay with me, because in the next part, we'll open that envelope and read every single word just as it was delivered, unedited, unfiltered, from one soldier to the world he left behind. The small house in Ohio stood quiet on that cold December morning. Frost clung to the windows. The front yard, usually lively with neighborhood kids, lay empty and still. Inside, Margaret Keller sat by the kitchen table, hands wrapped tightly around a chipped porcelain cup of coffee she hadn't touched in over an hour. The letter lay unopened in front of her, its edges worn from the trembling fingers that had held it all morning. Postmarked weeks ago, delivered late, far too late. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing louder than the last. The moment she saw the military seal on the envelope, she knew, even before reading a single word, her son, her Thomas, was gone. But still, she couldn't bring herself to break the seal, not yet. The house felt colder than usual, as if the walls themselves understood the weight of what rested on that table. The ticking of the wall clock grew unbearable. Each second stretched longer and longer, until Margaret couldn't take it anymore. With shaking hands, she reached for the envelope. Her fingers struggled to tear the paper cleanly. It didn't matter. Nothing felt real anyway. Unfolding the letter, she stared at the first line, and began to read. November 20th, 1944. Dear Mom, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. Margaret's throat tightened. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to continue. I don't want you to cry for me. Not now, not after everything we've been through. I've had time to prepare for this. More time than I probably deserved. But there are some things I need you to know. Things I couldn't say in my last phone call, or in the postcards I sent you before this. First, I love you more than I ever found the words to say when I was home. You raised me with more, the strength and kindness than I think I ever thanked you for. Every warm meal, every lecture I pretended not to listen to. Every night you stayed up waiting for me to come home. I carried all of it with me. Every step, every mile, every battle. Margaret's hands shook uncontrollably. Her tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. But she kept reading. Second, I want you to know that I wasn't afraid in the end. Not really. Sure, there were moments that scared me. Moments where my heart felt like it would tear out of my chest. But when it really mattered, I thought of home, of you, of Dad, of Emma and the porch swing, of Sunday dinners and the smell of fresh bread in the kitchen. I wasn't alone, Mom. I had the boys with me. Davis Miller, even Sergeant Green cracked a joke right before we went over the ridge. Can you believe that? We laughed. Even then, Margaret wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater, her breathing shallow, trembling. Third, there's something important I need you to do for me. I want you to find Davis's family in Miller's and tell them their sons fought with honor. They didn't run. They didn't falter. They stood by me right to the end. We were brothers in every way that matters. The words felt like a knife twisting inside her chest. Her boy, her Thomas, writing these words knowing what was coming. And finally, Mom, please don't let this define my story. Don't let my photo hang on the wall as just another face in uniform. Tell people who I really was. Tell them about the time I broke my arm climbing Mr. Jenkins's fence, or how I cried like a baby the first time I had to put down our old dog, Max. Tell them about the stupid songs I made up when I washed dishes, and how bad I was at math, even though you kept trying to help me. Tell them I lived, and that I loved you. Margaret pressed the letter to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably now, rocking back and forth in her chair like she had when Thomas was a baby, cradling him after a bad dream. The weight of the loss crushed her, but so did the pride of a mother who raised a son strong enough, kind enough, brave enough to leave these words behind for the next few days. Neighbors visited, friends brought casseroles, local church members offered prayers, but none of it filled the hollow ache in her heart. Late at night, after everyone left, she would sit alone by the window, holding the letter, reading it again and again, tracing the faded pencil lines with her fingertips. One evening, she found herself staring at the old family photo on the mantel. Thomas, age 8, smiling with 2 missing teeth. Margaret smiled back through her tears. A month later, a local journalist, hearing about the letter, asked if she would share it for a feature story on soldiers' last words. At first, she said no. It felt too personal, too sacred. But then, remembering Thomas's final request, she agreed. Weeks later, the letter appeared in print. Front page, headlined, "If you're reading this, I'm already dead. A soldier's last words to his mother." The story spread faster than anyone expected. First the local paper, then state-wide, then national. Soon, letters poured into Margaret's mailbox. Hundreds. From strangers. Other mothers, other soldiers' families, even school children, sending drawings and prayers. Some wrote just to say they cried when they read it. Others said it helped them heal from their own losses. Thomas's words, written in a muddy foxhole, became a symbol, a reminder of every soldier's humanity. His story wasn't just about death anymore. It became about connection, about love, about legacy. Veterans who never spoke of the war started opening up to their families after reading the letter. Teachers used it in classrooms to show the human side of history. Even congressmen referenced it during speeches about the need for better support for returning veterans. All from one letter. One young man, one final message to his mother. Margaret kept every single response she received, box after box filled with envelopes and notes. And every night, she added them to the growing collection, right next to the original letter. Decades later, long after Margaret passed away, that letter was donated to the National World War II Museum today. Visitors can stand before the glass case that holds it, reading the faded pencil lines, the tear-stained paper, the raw emotion preserved forever. People from around the world come to see it. Some stand in silence, others cry openly. Many leave small notes of their own, pressed against the glass. Messages to loved ones, to friends, to soldiers long gone. A ripple of human connection, stretching across time. And as you sit there, watching this video, hearing these words, I want you to think, what legacy would your words leave if you had one final chance, one last page? What story would you tell? Would it be about love, about regrets, about hope, or simply about living? If this story touched you, share it. Let more people hear Thomas's voice. Let more people remember not just the battles, but the human hearts that fought them. And if you want to hear more real, emotional stories like this, hit the like button. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because history is full of voices like Thomas's, waiting to be heard, waiting to be remembered. And in our next episode, we'll dive into another letter from a different war, a different battlefield, but with the same beating heart behind every word. Stay with me. Decades passed. The letter, now fragile with age, rested inside a sealed archival frame at the National World War II Museum. Soft, controlled lighting illuminated the faded pencil marks. The paper's edges had browned, its fibers showing the strain of time, yet the words, those simple, human words, remained as powerful as the day Margaret first opened the envelope. Visitors came from all over the world to stand before the glass. Young students on school trips, elderly veterans leaning on canes, families with small children who barely understood war, but somehow sensed the weight of what they were seeing. Some stood for minutes, others for hours. A father with 2 teenage sons paused one afternoon, reading each line aloud, his voice trembling near the end. His youngest son looked up at him, eyes wide, asking, "Dad, would you write me something like that if you had to go?" The father knelt, hugged his son tightly, and whispered, "I'd never let you go a day not knowing how much I love you." The letter wasn't just history anymore, it was a mirror, reflecting the universal fear of loss and the enduring power of love. In one corner of the museum, a guestbook sat on a small wooden stand. Thousands of signatures filled its pages. Many visitors left messages of their own. From my brother, who never came home from Vietnam, to my grandfather, who served in Korea and never spoke of it. For every soldier whose words never made it back. But it wasn't just in the museum where Thomas's story lived on. High school teachers included the letter in their history lessons. English professors used it as an example of raw, emotional writing, Filmmakers cited it as inspiration for scenes in war dramas. One day, a young woman named Rachel, writer and granddaughter of a World War II vet, decided to publish a book compiling soldiers' final letters from different wars. At the very heart of the book, she placed Thomas's letter. Its title, "If You're Reading This, I'm Already Dead." The book became a bestseller. Readers around the world found comfort, heartbreak, and healing within its pages. Rachel later said in interviews, Thomas's letter wasn't about death, it was about life, about connection, about the words we're often too afraid to say until it's too late. As sales grew, proceeds from the book were donated to veteran support organizations. Thousands of homeless veterans received meals, shelter, and counseling thanks to funds raised in Thomas's name. It's strange, isn't it? How a single piece of paper, scribbled in a muddy foxhole by a scared young man, could ripple outwards, changing lives he'd never meet, across decades he'd never see. And still, the story continued. In 2004, a documentary team approached the museum. They wanted to create a short film focusing on Thomas's letter and Margaret's story. The filmmakers interviewed surviving members of Thomas's unit. They spoke with historians, psychologists, and Margaret's neighbors who still remembered her sitting by the window with that letter. The documentary aired on national television. Millions watched. Viewers flooded online forums with reactions. Some shared their own family letters. Others posted messages like, "I called my mom after watching this, just to say I love her. I wrote my first letter to my son tonight, just in case I'm ever not there to say these things in person." This story changed me, and somewhere in a small town in Ohio, a distant cousin of Thomas, now elderly herself, smiled as she watched the program. She whispered, "He'd like this. He always wanted to make people smile, even when things got tough." Years later, a teacher in Germany reached out to the museum. She wanted to translate Thomas's letter into German to use in her high school curriculum. Her goal, to teach students about empathy, about seeing the enemy as human. The museum agreed soon. Thomas's words reached classrooms across Europe. French, Italian, Japanese, Spanish, even Russian. Schools began including the letter in their materials about World War II. One elderly Russian teacher wrote, "We teach our students that behind every uniform, there is a heart." Thomas helped make that real, and the ripple kept growing. Social media users shared digital scans of the letter, posting captions like, "Read this, then hug someone you love. This isn't history, it's humanity." The hashtag letters from the front started trending. Memorial Day. Ceremonies across the US began reading excerpts from Thomas's letter aloud. During tributes, veteran groups printed the letter on posters, displayed in community centers, schools, libraries. Some soldiers deployed overseas carried a folded copy of the letter in their pockets, as a reminder of home, of purpose, of the people waiting for them. One Marine wrote to the museum from Afghanistan, "Whenever things get dark, I read Thomas's words. Reminds me why I fight, why I survive." By 2020, on the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, a special exhibit was launched, titled Voices from the Front, Letters That Changed the World. At the center, Thomas's letter displayed alongside audio recordings of actors reading it aloud. Visitors stood with headphones on, tears running down their faces, as they listened to those simple, human words from a soldier who never came home. The exhibit traveled to cities around the world. London, Paris, Berlin, Tokyo. People from all walks of life, all languages, all generations, stood before that letter and felt something shift inside them. Because grief, love, hope, regret, they're not bound by borders. They're universal. In 2022, a small independent filmmaker released a short animated film, reimagining Thomas's final night in the foxhole. The animation showed him writing by dim flashlight, bombs echoing in the distance, friends sitting close, fear lingering in the cold night air. The film ended with the words of the letter, voiced by a young actor over soft piano music. It won multiple awards at international film festivals, and the ripple grew wider still. By now, millions of people knew Thomas Keller's name, knew Margaret's heartbreak, felt the sting of those final words, and understood the human cost behind every folded flag, every ceremony, every name etched into stone memorials. But perhaps the most powerful legacy was personal. Families, inspired by Thomas, started writing their own letters, not because they expected to die, but because they wanted their loved ones to know how they felt before it was too late. One father wrote to his daughter, apologizing for years of distance. A wife struggling with depression wrote her husband, thanking him for staying by her side. A teenage boy, who'd never spoken much about feelings, handed his mom a simple note, "If you're reading this, it's because I finally found the courage to say I love you." And so, Thomas's story became something larger than a war letter. It became a movement, a reminder that words matter, that moments matter, that behind every statistic there's a story, a family, a beating heart. So now, as we reach the end of this video, I'll leave you with a challenge. Write your letter to your mother, to your father, to your kids, to your partner, or even to yourself. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait for tragedy. Tell them how you feel, what you love about them. what you're grateful for, before the words are left unsaid. And if this story moved you, please share this video. Let Thomas's voice continue to echo across screens, across hearts, across time. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing we can leave behind is our story. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe, because next week we'll bring you another real letter, another voice from history, another story waiting to be heard. Until then, stay safe, stay kind, and never leave your words unsaid.